Hi, I'm Patricia Greenberg, and this is Eat Well, Live Well, Age Well, a show where we talk about all things aging well. My guest today is Michelle Porjes. She's the founder of LA Elderly. It's a Facebook page and website that's a place to find information, connection, and inspiration. This site is designed to reach individuals who are searching for information and meaning in a time of life that no one really plans for, which is when the care and the comfort of an elderly loved one becomes the responsibility of others. We have all been there. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so there's nuts and bolts, and there's the emotional aspect, and there's the practical aspect. So let's start out. What is LA Elderly, and how did it come about?
Great question. So I went on a 10-year journey with my mom with dementia, and it showed up what I thought was out of nowhere. And I ended up taking her to the doctor, and she passed the memory test at 100%. And I thought I was the problem. And by the end of the summer, I was not the problem. And she was going downhill and going downhill quickly. And I remember a particular point, never forget it. At this point, it's about 14 years ago, when I thought I was in a social worker's office. It turns out I was in a social services office, which is different. I thought I was talking to a social worker. I was talking to a social services personnel. And I said, what do I do? Where do I go? What kind of placement should I get her? And I got handed a pamphlet, and I'll never forget that moment. And I sat with that moment for over 10 years. 30 days after my mom passed, I said, I'm going to run a Facebook group. I'm going to launch a Facebook group. I'm going to call it LA Elderly. And I hit establish or set the group up. At that point, you could sort of dump your contacts in.
Right.
So I put in all my friends, and I waited. And there were some comments. And within a week, I remember this, that somebody asked a question, and the question got answered, and help was given, and we were off to the races.
Wow. Wow.
And after that, there's certain little marks of how many numbers make a group viable. 50 is your first one, 500 is your second one. And the group sort of took off, and it started to seed itself and grow by itself. And I went chasing after it, because I do have a degree in psychology, and I know about connecting people. I'm a facilitator. I did not know about an online group. So I remember speaking with a colleague and saying, okay, tell me everything about an online group. He had established an online group that was very successful. And I just learned, and I learned hands on deck.
Whether you're just learning about caretaking for the elderly or you're in the throes of it, LA Elderly can help. I'm just going to give the website a couple times throughout the show so people can access it. www.laelderly.org. I want to make sure it's org, laelderly.org. And I have used it on occasion. And in fact, I want to share with everybody, it's not just for extreme cases. Somebody was looking for a part-time caretaker for the weekend, or a substitute, or just how to access medical information, medical equipment, etc. It starts with a grassroots effort, like anything else. Like you're saying, you put it up there. I know you dealt with the long, slow goodbye of dementia. What are some of the other considerations in taking care of an elderly person? Even if they're in reasonably good health. I had mentioned to you when we did a preliminary discussion, I had my mother-in-law in the house until she was 103.
Wow.
And she was with it and great until the very, very end. And then I hate using this expression because it sounds like the train wreck, but one thing goes, and then a few things goes, and then you need an army. And you don't want to wait till that point where you need an army. You want to be prepared.
And I think that that's a good point. I think, part of really establishing LA Elderly, and part of why I felt so strong about this, is that you're going along with your life. You're raising kids, you're raising dogs, you're establishing your career, you may be mid-career, and all of a sudden something slams and it hits you, and you become part of the sandwich generation. Right. And it's interesting, there's all these terms about sandwich generation, open phase, stove phase, all that kind of stuff. But it hits you out of nowhere. And if you don't have anywhere to turn, it can feel very lonely, very stressful. Having an elderly loved one change, not even just broke a leg or have a little bit of a setback, but change and then continue to change or continue to decline is a very stressful thing. So the establishment of the Facebook group in particular is for support and exchange of information. And it is not, I remember when I did a live event and somebody called to ask about it, and they said, is it going to be all about hospice? Because I'm not coming. And
Yeah.
no. And there was somebody that was massage and somebody did essential oils. So although there are many hospice companies that are on, and I welcome them, it is not all about hospice. It is about when you get up at 2 a.m, you don't know where to turn. Maybe it's the first sign, right? So the first sign that I had was my mom going, yeah, it was something about a birthday. And I thought, this is an awkward conversation, right? Yeah. So you're like, where do we go? All the way down to the end, right? Like I have to make decisions all the way down to what do I do? And you and I have chatted, and I think we're on the same page about how do I help for my family? How do I make sure my children are taken care of? And down to even fun things like what activities are there? What books are there? What kind of ways can grandparents be involved in kids' life? So I don't see it as a negative place. I know that, how do I say this? Nobody wants to be on LA Elderly, right?
Right.
Want to be there, but we're sure glad there's something.
Right.
And there are other groups, and I certainly follow many other groups. This one I find is a little lighter, a little more hopeful, but it's more based to the city, right? So people will say, that's nice, and where do I get that? Or where do I hire someone?
Right.
And I think that becomes the all-inclusive piece to that I not only want to find a caretaker, but I want to find out what care placements there are. And I'm also looking for what activities there are for me as a caregiver. And by the way, you put something cool on there about activities to do with grandchildren, grandparents. I'm going to try that as well.
Right. That was a question I wanted to get at is there's this, we have lost sight in our society of multi-generations living in one home and peacefully. Kids are annoyed that their grandparents are in the house. And mommy's neglecting me because grandma's here, where it used to be that you respected your elders and you learned how to be part of a family just by being part of a family, and that you watched your parents take care of your grandparents. In turn, they took care of you growing up, and it breeds a more compassionate person. And because we're all over the place, I think that a site like this is even more important, that people can go and say, my son feels neglected because I'm spending a lot of time with my mother. How do I remedy that? I mean, that's where this big open discussion comes of what do we do? Taking care of an elderly person engages the whole entire family, whether you like it or not. That's really the reality.
Right. So I see a little bit the flip side of that coin.
Okay.
Which I think is also, and I absolutely what you said is true, but here's the flip side of the coin. And this is me sort of wearing the psychologist hat that I wear, which is a lot of times, kids are open to it. Grandparents are not typically living with parents. They are open to it. But what's happening is the family members in the middle, meaning the father, or especially the mother, who's trying to raise the kids and get the kid off to college and summer camp and deal with their elderly mother, maybe two parents, and being screamed at because dementia is not fun.
That's right.
There are feelings of depression and anxiety that happen with the individual. So the real importance behind this is, how do you self-care? So how do you do that 10-year journey? Look, it is painful to have somebody on hospice for a month and then pass away at any age. It is a different kind of painful to go on a journey for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, where there's a slow decline, but still the help is needed. And dementia does wonderful things to your brain, right? So all of a sudden you're being accused of being an alcoholic or stealing or having set a fire or hitting. Like, they said, my person hit me. So that's the other aspect that I really have worked with LA Elderly, the website particular, but also the Facebook group, is how are you taking care of you? Because you are in a marathon. And, a kid can get, grandma needs time. What a kid can't process when they're young is that I have no problem with a kid needing time, but my mom is so depressed after giving that time that I might not be getting the quality time that I need.
Right.
That's where you have the intermediary, where it really is focused a lot on the sandwich generation about how do you take care of yourself. And I'm not talking about the trip to Hawaii, although nice. Yeah, I'd love to go back. I'm talking about the daily,
the day to day. Yes. I think we also have a responsibility as parents to teach our children that aging is normal.
Correct.
And this is a part of aging. And the longer people live, the more you may or may not deal with it. But it's again that pervasive youth obsessed society where we don't understand that aging is just as natural as everything else that happens in our lives. I teach classes about this all the time, and it's something that we need to keep talking about, that it's okay to get old. It really is. And I'm of the belief that you should be here as long as possible. And at the first sign of something, you shouldn't be cast away and regarded as old and ignorant and not, again, it's bridging that gap between people who want to run away from it and people who want to embrace it. Like you say, nobody really wants to be on LA Elderly, but it's there and it's a wonderful resource. Michelle, you wrote a book called Potholes and Pizza.
Yeah.
You put your story to paper. It's available on Amazon. Again, Potholes and Pizza by Michelle Porjes, Porjes. And how was that experience to actually write down the sequence of events and share it with the world?
So I like to write. Writing is something I've always been good at. As I've moved into my career that I'm in now, my writing has changed more. It's more about telling my story. And it's still telling my story with here's things to do, here's things to think about. That part has not changed. But it was therapeutic, but more I felt it was informative. I wanted the story out there. It is my story. Everybody has a story. Right. And that's my tagline. Everyone has a story and here's mine. And when I've spoken to live groups or I've done Zooms, that's how I open. I guess in the background, it is a story for my kids to have as well. But it was really not one piece. It was a piece to talk about how she grew up because she was a Holocaust survivor, versus my childhood being very normal when it didn't necessarily need to be, versus becoming a grandparent, versus when things changed and me trying to find things to live by. Right at the end, it was all about dignity and respect and no pain. And that became my guiding principles. And the people I met along the way, certain nurses, certain hospice workers, and people that weren't so nice. When dementia hits, you never know how your friends are going to react, or your parents or the significant loved ones' friends are going to act. And sometimes they're all hands on deck, and other time they're not, and they're accusatory. And it's only when it happens to them later on they go, "Whoa, now I get it." So if we can break some of those kinds of things, I think would be good.
I think that some of the problem too is that for some reason, when we feel we're going through something trying, like an ill parent, a parent with dementia, or even, like you say, a host of problems that aren't dementia but require a lot of care, you feel alone. And there is a reality in some people not wanting to be around it. It's like the old saying that's contagious, right? That if it happens to them, it can happen to me, and I don't want to be anywhere near it. I want to be positive. And so, unfortunately, your family might become LA Elderly when you're going through this, rather than your real family. I hate saying it that way, but it's something to think.
That's an interesting point to look at, right? So for some people, I think there have been established relationships made. Look, LA Elderly also, for I would say half of its career or lifespan, has been in the time of COVID. Boy, hasn't that changed things, right? So there's a whole book within itself there, but that's been a piece as well. And sometimes your family is your family, and sometimes it's your friends, and sometimes it's the most unlikely person, right? You meet somebody who's in the same placement as your loved one, and they're going through the same thing. You became fast friends over what you're going through, and it is life. And you had said something before, and I sort of wanted to respond back, that in general, we look at development like up to age 18, right? And then we say the kid is an adult. I work with kids that are 18 to 30. They're not adults yet, on their way. And each year they go further and further. But the point to hold on to, particularly for anybody who's in the sandwich generation, is that development never stops. And we develop and we change. So our goals in our 20s and our goals in our 30s are different than our 40s and 50s. And often our loved ones' decline is happening somewhere in our 40s or 50s or maybe 60s. And that happens to be the majority of people who are LA Elderly. So you're going through establishments like, who do I want to be and what do I want? Do I want the same job? Do I want to teach others? Do I want to retire? Do I not? How do I pay for college? And the list goes on and on. At that same time where you're wrestling with life's development, you then begin to wrestle with the life development for your elderly loved one.
Exactly.
Or quite frankly, there are people that are wrestling with their life development for more than one elderly.
Yes.
I agree with that. But that's a whole other situation, right? When both people are going downhill, or one goes downhill physically and one goes downhill emotionally, mentally at the same time, that you have a special needs kid. There's a whole other thing, and you read these people's stories and you realize you've been through something. There's been some trauma there. You've come through, but everyone has their story.
Absolutely.
There's people that have got bigger stories than I do.
I have so many questions and we're going on. So did your mother tell you when she was still lucid, if that's the right word? Is lucid the right word? Because I don't want to be offensive.
No, it's not offensive to me.
Okay. Did she tell you her life story? Did you know enough about her before she became incapacitated to?
I've known from when I was a young child.
Okay.
I am generationally that second generation after the Holocaust, although I'm at the very younger range.
Yes, you are. You're young. Yeah.
And here's why. She was 7 when she got booted out of school in Vienna. They put all the kids in the street and they said, "You're done." And my grandfather said, "We're gone." And that's partially how they survived. So I had been hearing the stories actually from both of my parents. But because I was brought up by her, and for a number of years, my grandfather lived with us, and I was brought up comfortably understanding the Holocaust and how it played out and what our role was, but in a way that wasn't traumatizing. A lot of people from that second generation felt the guilt and how come, or they felt they never had a normal childhood. I said in our eulogy, I really had a normal childhood. I came from European parents. Before the word play date was play date, I knew about play dates.
Yes.
I went bowling, I played cards.
Yeah.
And this was really due to her. My father was wonderful, but he worked a lot. He was much older. He was 50 when I was born. So it was a big thing. She was 35, so again, a little bit older at the time, but had a normal life. So I was aware of all of it, including other pieces, some of which I wrote about in the book, others of which I don't. I don't shy away from talking about it now as well. It's just been a part of who I am and what my journey has been.
So it didn't play a role later on in her being angry or belligerent towards you,
Okay. Not towards me, but she went right back to the Nazis. There was part of her went right back to the Nazis. She once, I'll never forget, she started screaming at somebody in German. Now, my mom had left German a long time ago, the completely fluent, like many Holocaust people.
Yes.
That language again. And she blew off in German. I was like, holy moly, what's happening? And there was a whole dimension thing around, am I Jewish? I don't know where that came from. And this one's a Nazi and he's out to get me. And there are things that I know are from the emotional torture or turmoil or whatever bad word. She wasn't in a camp, but she didn't have great experiences. She had a really disrupted childhood and adolescence that I know of from those experiences. So she did go back there at a certain time, particularly that moment when she went off in German. I was like,
because that's what I understand about it, is that sometimes you go back to a time period and it's 50 years ago is crystal clear. You can't remember what you ate, but what was going on can be very traumatizing.
It was bizarrely clear. She did go back to those moments. Did she get angry and belligerent at me? I will tell you that was the hardest thing. I was her only child. There was clearly a lot of joy. She had 2 grandsons. There was incredible joy with that. And towards the end, I got screamed at on a daily basis. She decided one of my kids was good and one of my kids wasn't good for no reason. And that is hard to take, that is defeating, but you hold on to the fact that it's not them. And that relationship, because I got accused of everything under the sun at the end and got yelled at. Then I was like, really, what am I going to do? You just have to take it. For a long time, I worked to keep her in this world, and that worked, right? I kept her safe, but I kept her in this world. We went out to lunch, and that's Potholes and Pizza. We went out to a little pizza place, had our 2 little Diet Cokes. And that was our little spot where we sat in the same little place when we came in. So she did stay in the world until she didn't.
Yeah. And that consistency is very important, regardless of if they're going off or not. If the familiarity really helps. Michelle, I know the website and the page is called LA Elderly, but people from all over the country, if not the world, can benefit from this website and Facebook page. I want to just mention, no matter where you're located in the world, and no matter what stage of caretaking you're in, we're all in together. It's a village. And that's why I said this can become your family. So if you can tell us some more about what the site has to offer.
Yeah, sure. So actually, so the Facebook is a group, and the difference between a group and a page is interactive. So you can get up at 2 a.m. and go, I need transportation. Who's got somebody's transportation? By that morning, someone's going to say, call this one, call that one.
Mm.
So that instantaneous kind of hook me up,
Right.
which is modeled after a lot of things around the country,
Mhm.
New York mommies, Tennessee children or whatever. It's modeled after that, but for the elderly. Any information you need can be there. And there's a lot of people on the site that are providers. So there's people that will help you find placement. There's people that are nurses. There's people that are traveling dentists. There's people that have hairdressers. I mean, things that I just wasn't aware of to sort of help. There's somebody who does social work, and she gets on with Zoom or whatever, it's covered by insurance, and she'll meet with your loved one on Zoom or FaceTime or just talk about different things, which is great. The website is more static, but there are really 3 different levels of support you can get on that. I house information. A lot of it are blogs I've written or information I've written, but there's also interesting stuff. I just put up something today with someone put up about life insurance policies, and then I put it out. Somebody wrote up about anxiety in the elderly.
Yes.
Things that no one tells you about, like UTIs and confusion. Like I had to look that up. Like no doctor ever mentioned that to me. So I had to research. So I'm like, I don't want anyone to ever research that one again. Or I don't want anyone to ever have to research sundowning again. Like it is on the site. Right. It's not a lot, but it's something for you to understand. Like, why is it every time when it's dark, they seem to go?
Yes.
And there's reasons for that. But 12, 14 years ago, when I did it, it wasn't there. It was like, I researched it. So there's things like that. Then there's a lot on self-care, and I'm not backing down for that. I think that people have to self-care. I think elderly have to self-care as well, but I think caregivers have to self-care. And if you are that caregiver, not everybody has children, but people can be the sandwich generation and not have children.
That's absolutely right. There's things going on in your life.
Yeah, I don't want to limit it to that.
Right.
And then there's like inspiration, and I ask people to share their stories, or I share. And we're selling ads, for people to be able to get more exposure, because what I never want in the group or the Facebook group is just ads. So I monitor that very closely, much to some people's chagrin. But, these are people that believe in the mission, that are willing to put their money where their mouth is, that I know are really helpful. So that's the site, and that can be accessed. And we're building out the site, meaning we want to have resources there. We are looking at, maybe email lists or some other kinds of stuff, because here's the deal. And I will say this, and I say this every time. I do not want LA Elderly to be tied to one platform. Right. There is a guarantee that Facebook will be it forever. LinkedIn will be it forever. So LA Elderly has to be able to go with the times. And although that's frustrating to some people who go, I just do my Facebook. I have many people who call me and say, I don't do Facebook. Right. Sometimes I help and I'll pop an ad in there, but I have a whole career. So I want people to go to an email and put in something on there, because we do know about email, that email is robust. And even though people use all this other stuff, email does not look like it's going to go away. Exactly. Yeah. Access information so it doesn't feel lonely.
Michelle, I want to point out to everybody that you have a thriving educational consulting business. And you alluded to it, but talk to us about people who have to work and take care of their loved ones simultaneously. I don't know what the magic formula is. We've all been there. My parents were in Arizona. My mother-in-law was here, so I was flying back and forth, but my brother was there. I'm lucky I'm one of 5. And my husband's one of 2. So we had a few more pairs of hands here. What do you do?
Yeah,
you have to work and you have to take care. Your children are another added entity. You have to be clear about your work. You have to get up in the morning and be focused. You have work to do. You're responsible to the people that you work for
100%.
Or with.
And I will tell you this, though now I work for myself and I work out of my home, and I do a lot on Zoom. At the point with the dementia, her entire dementia role, I was school-based and I was in a private school. And there's a couple of things. Sometimes if you're in a good place, work can be your solace, right? It can feel good and you can have a work family, and that's great. And towards the end, which was very tough, I knew she was on hospice, I knew she was going, and And I really worked on compartmentalizing. And even in the book, I did send email updates, particularly to my colleagues, not necessarily to everyone I worked with. But I would send email updates. Like I knew she was going to go. I just didn't know when. Like, here's what's happening. But, compartmentalizing is not easy, but often it saves a lot of people. It means when you're home, you're home. When you're at work, you're work. It's a little harder to be home and not be at
Yes.
work. That's a whole other story. But,
Mhm.
when I was at work, I really tried to compartmentalize. And so how does that happen? It happens to be I'm pretty organized. So I could organize time. It also happens to be that I made sure I had the right people in the community. I'm writing a letter now to people starting the road out,
Mm.
to interacting with loved ones who have dementia. And it's like, you don't need an army, you need the right people, right? The
Right.
right people might be your sister, your brother, your boss, or your friend, but it might not. It might be a caregiver. It might be a nurse that looks out for you or your family. It might be befriending somebody. And, that's really important. When you're an adult and you're in that career and you're, having kids, and look, kids nowadays, and you mentioned my career, they have a lot of challenges.
Yes.
Let's not forget the last 2 years. There's emotional, there's
Oh,
mental,
sure.
there's
Hmm.
college, there's family with multiple kids with special needs. So there's a lot going on there. So you have to have the right people, and the right people for your children and the right people for your work. So that's a piece. And the other piece, and we'll say it again, self-care. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting
Right.
enough water? Are you finding times to eat? Are you finding times to connect nature? Are you getting out in sunlight? These are things that I lived by for 10 years. Did I have a life during those 10 years? I 100% did. Was there joy during those 10 years? 100%. Did I have joyful moments with my mom? 100%. Towards the end, where those joyful moments shrunk? Yeah, they were. Those 3 months were incredibly hard.
Right.
Incredibly hard. And there wasn't too much joy in those moments. I was hanging on there. But there was times where things flow, and there's a term, expect the unexpected,
Yes.
which is a really good thing to live by when there's certain issues. Special needs is one, dementia, I would say, is another, that when it works, just roll with it. And when it doesn't work, you got to dig in. And the consistently inconsistent is what it is. And that's with a lot of things. That's where people suffer from mental illness. That's where, like, learning issues, schizophrenia, dementia, it's all the same kind of thing. Enjoy it. Live in the moment when it's good and when it's not, planned for it.
Michelle, in closing, I want to, because there's so much, I could stay on the call with you all day. What do you say to people who are resistant to getting the help? They're so scared to get, people become immobilized with fear. Can you give me and our audience some words of encouragement?
Yeah, that is hard. I will say dementia, particularly with dementia. With the physical, I can't speak as much, but dementia is sneaky.
Yeah.
So like I said, she passed the test at 100%.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm just not just too clued in, but I thought I'm too sensitive. I'm bringing the different hat.
Right.
And then things got better for a while, and things got worse for a while. And it is a journey. And I will tell you this, and this is not among the favorite approaches, but it's what worked for me. You have to find out what works for you.
Yeah.
It's always number one about safety. The
Right.
moment it wasn't safe, things changed. That was
Right.
number one. Number two, it was less about diagnosis to me. I never had her diagnosed. She never had a formal diagnosis. She didn't need a formal diagnosis. Now that's my choice. And the reason being, there's no formal treatment that works. Was
Right.
she on some memory medicine? Of course. Nobody needs to have a huge neurological assessment for that. I didn't need a term. I felt that really invasive tests would have caused tremendous anxiety, of which was heightened. Of course, it was a CT scan just to make sure there wasn't a brain tumor. I remember that.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, okay, you always want to rule out that there's not
Right.
something like that. But once it became whatever it became, and dementia is a loose term, whether it's Lewy body or
Right.
Alzheimer's, it didn't matter, because it's all going to be the same thing. I didn't need to do that. So it's all about a couple of things. It's about, what do you need to have your life go on? What do they need to have purpose in their life, right? How can they be comfortable? How can they be safe? How can they be purposeful? And that does change, along the way. So it's less about accepting that diagnosis and more about what they need at one point. And it is shocking. I wrote in the book, there was one point I came to she was in a board and care, and I looked through the little window of the door, and she was having dinner at the table with everybody else, which I loved. And there was a bib around her. And I thought, oh my God. And I think she was in a wheelchair. Maybe she wasn't. What happened? But eventually it was like, but she's having dinner with people.
Right.
So time changes you. I think you don't have to give up right away. You don't have to give up right away. There was a time I think she'd last a year. She lived for 9 years. 9 years after. She was mobile for 8 of those years. She got herself down dining room for 8 of those years. We went out to lunch for 8 of those years. So it's step by step. The denial is all about the safety. If they're not safe and they're driving a car, there's a car.
Yes. Oh, yes.
But they're going to be okay. Or, I don't want full-time care. That's up to you. You will know. I think you have to trust. You will know when that doesn't work.
But please reach out. I can't say enough to everybody that just whether it's make the phone call, get on LA Elderly and ask. There's forums, there's boards, there's resources to read about. So Michelle, you're an angel to be here and be doing this. And a continued success. And I hope to be part of the process of helping you grow and sharing
this
with,
for what you do.
more people. Thank you.
You're a lot on LA Elderly, and I know that you and I have been together in some meetings.
Yes,
yes. Bringing purpose and reality and vitality to not only the elderly, but to the caregivers as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Michelle, Michelle Porjes, the founder of LA Elderly, a resource for patients, caretakers, and their families, www.laelderly.org. Michelle, I always like to ask my guests, what do you like about getting older?
That's a good question. I will tell you, at this point, I don't take much from people. I want to believe what I want to believe, and you don't want to, I'll let you walk away. I'm not going to argue with you. There's this thing, if you say 2 + 2 is 5, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you about that.
Right.
I know what I know. I'm happy to share with the next generation. I'm not going to get into petty little discussions. I don't have time for that. I'm living my life. I'm happy. I'm healthy, thank God. And that's more important. So
yeah, it's bad for your health to be worried about all these things also. So let it go.
You know what, you do you, I'll do me, and whatever.
Yeah, great. So thank you again, Michelle. So good to have you, and we'll do it again soon. Thank you for listening to Eat Well, Live Well, Age Well, and please subscribe to my channel here on YouTube for engaging discussions about all things aging well.